my Doodling with Debbie feature at SSS Stamp, I'm creating two simply stamped tropical leaves cards which use two takes on the same design. For these cards I use the tropical leaves stamps and dies from SSS Stamp, along with their Big Greetings 1 set for the sentiments. I picked 3 colours of Simon inks to start with: Beanstalk Green, Green Leaf and Evergreen, although later on I bring in a 4th colour, Seafoam. I placed a piece of Neenah Solar White card in the Mini Misty and positioned the Monstera leaf on the door of the Misty ready for stamping. For this leaf I'm using green leaf ink. I stamped each leaf twice to get the best impression, then moved the stamp and repeated until I had 4 leaves. I think the Monstera leaf is particularly iconic and trendy at the moment. However, I wanted to bring in some different green colours and different leaf shapes, and so I continued to stamp the leaves from the tropical leaf set until I had 4 leaf shapes stamped in 4 different ink colours and stamped 4 times each to give a total of 16 leaves to arrange on my card. I cut the card so that each leaf was on its own square of card and then aligned the matching die to each shape. I kept the dies in place with washi tape and then arranged 4 leaves at a time on my stamp platform and ran them through the die cutting machine. In the end I found that 12 leaves were sufficient for this card, 3 of each leaf type. Moving on to the sentiment, and I placed a piece of SLATE card in the Mini Misty and then chose the Hooray sentiment from the SSS Stamp Big Greetings 1 set. I'm going to emboss this sentiment, and so I treated the card with a powder tool to help prevent stray embossing powder sticking erroneously. I stamped the sentiment in clear embossing ink and then sprinkled with SSS Stamp white embossing powder before heat setting. I rubbed off the powder tool marks with soft cloth and then trimmed to a banner. I'm going to mount the leaves and sentiment on a panel of white card, but I wanted to add a touch of detail to it by die cutting with a WONKY rectangle die. The stitch frame of this die sets off the centre focal point nicely. I added a double layer foam adhesive to the sentiment and mounted in the centre of the panel. The double layer foam tape gives extra height to the banner so that I could tuck the leaves underneath. All the leaves have a single layer foam tape on the back, and I added them with the leaves spreading out away from the sentiment and the stems tucked in. As I was adding the leaves, I was keeping an eye on placement so that there was a good spread of leaf shapes and colours around the sentiment banner. I added foam tape to the back of the panel and then mounted it on a top folding card base, cut and scored from Neenah Solar White card in the sturdy £110 weight. To finish, I added a few Butterfly Kisses sequins from SSS Stamp, held in place with Ranger Multimedia Matte. And that completes this first Tropical Leaves card. However, I wanted to make another similar card, but this time with the leaves around the edges of the panel. So I stamped and die cut another bunch of tropical leaves in the same colours as before, and I also stamped another sentiment from the Big Greetings 1 set in white embossing powder on SLATE card. I added the sentiment with foam tape to the middle of the white panel, which was again cut with a WONKY rectangle die. However, by the time I added all the leaves, you can really not tell that I used the die to cut the panel. It does, however, ensure that the panel is exactly the same size in each design. For this card, I added the leaves around the edge of the panel, with the leaves spreading towards the sentiment banner and their stems pointing off the edge of the panel. I then flipped the panel over and trimmed away any overhang from the leaves by following the line of the WONKY rectangles die. As with my first example, I finished the card with a sprinkling of Butterfly Kisses sequins kept in place with Ranger Multimedia Matte. And that completes my duo of Tropical Leaves cards. On the SSS Stamp blog you will find a coordinating blog post as well as details of the supplies I've used today. If you want to find me, I blog over at limedoodledesign.com. I want to thank you for joining me today, and I'll see you next time.